Hey guys. This is part 3 of What If Naruto Was in Kimetsu no Yaiba. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 6, Beyond the Hashira. Rokuro's shadow was strange. It felt strange, like being held, but also floating at the same time. It almost seemed to be alive as well, moving ever so slightly as its ethereal form remained wrapped around his torso. Naruto sent a pulse of chakra out of his body, and the black apparition tremored in response, sensitized by the foreign energy flooding through its ghostly structure. After a moment, it settled, still keeping a firm grasp around him, despite the air rushing around them. The demons were quick. They had already left the city's border and were now racing through the forest, intent on escaping before the sun began to rise. Even though morning was still far away, they made haste, rushing past bushes and trees, never slowing down for even a second. I say you attack them now. Kurama's powerful voice boomed in his head. Naruto considered that option, and considered it some more. But he came to the same conclusion as just minutes prior. If I attack them right now, Yuichiro might end up dead. Then make it quick, restrain them, seal them. Another option. It was a better one, but still risky, nonetheless. These shadows seemed to act autonomously. Even if I immobilized the one controlling them, Yuichiro and the other hostages could still be killed in an instant. An exasperated growl left Kurama, and Naruto could almost feel his mindscape tremor with bone-rattling vibrations. I told you not to get involved with the humans here. You did. Naruto could not deny this fact. But you know I can never turn my back on those in need. Yes, and it's one of your more annoying qualities, same with trying to reason with the enemy. He'd done so with Haku, Gaara, Nagato, Obito, and even Kurama. Sometimes, talking with your foe could lead to better understanding them. Other times it backfired. Terribly. It's because of that demon girl. Susumaru? Yes, the Biju intoned. She managed to change her ways, and subconsciously, you felt the same was possible for these three. You were holding back. That was a possibility. Because even before Susumaru, he had still talked to many of the demons that came after him, giving them an opportunity to change. But when they refused to listen, driven by a lust for his flesh, he did not hesitate to destroy them. Even so, had he truly been holding back? All for the sake of seeing if he could repeat the same change that happened in Susumaru with these three demons? Maybe, subconsciously. However, that didn't matter anymore. Now that more innocent lives were on the line, he had no choice but to kill them. But first, he had to rescue Yuichiro, as well as the others held captive by the bearded demon in front of him. Despite the speed at which they moved, the female demon, Mukago, he recalled, trailed just behind, sending subtle glances his way. She was looking at him hungrily, like Kamina was, but also curiously as well. Naruto could almost sense the tension around them. Their mission was done, yes. But from his point of view, it seemed that each one of them wanted him all to themselves. As grisly as it sounded, they had most likely made a deal concerning how they would divide his remains. And now, with their prize finally in front of them, that agreement seemed to be on shaky ground. In time, a dispute would likely erupt, shattering the small alliance they had formed. Naruto didn't care, though. They could argue over him all they wanted. His only focus was on finding and rescuing the hostages. Only then would he face them in combat for the last time. After all he'd seen them do, this would be their last night alive. He'd guarantee it. Why, you know, Mukago began suddenly. You remind me of someone. Naruto glanced her way. She'd inched closer, running next him. Her silver hair fluttered in the wind, revealing two horns that sparked with electricity. Etched upon her cheeks were marks that almost resembled the ones he possessed while in Biju mode. Her purple orbs also seemed to glow, a contrast to the red sclera of her eyes. How so? He inquired, entertaining a conversation. He had nothing else to do, after all. She looked away, unable to keep his gaze. I don't know. Naruto hummed. You don't know? Or you don't remember? The latter, she said softly. Maybe it's someone from my past. I'm not sure. How long have you been a demon? He inquired. Mukago found his gaze once more. 30 years. I think. You can never truly tell. Once you become a demon, time means nothing. He regarded her with curious eyes, eyes devoid of fear, in spite of his situation. She stilled at the sight of those calm blues. He was cornered, wasn't he? Rokuro had him in his grasp, pinned by unbreakable shadows. And not just that. Ahead, these same shadows were also wrapped around the hostages they had taken. All it would take was a single threat, a single questionable movement from Naruto, and lower rank 2 would begin to kill all the people they had captured, even Naruto's precious student. Then why? Why was he so calm? Was he planning something? Mukago did not know, but his very act of defiance made her want to understand this strange person more. At least, before she ate him. He was a human, was he not? He certainly looked like one. Acted like one. Smelled like one, too. Yet the things she'd seen him do during his fight with Kaminu, some of them seemed more in line with the abilities of a demon. Time means nothing once you're a demon, huh? Naruto echoed her words. I have to admit. It would be interesting to live forever. But I can't see myself doing such a thing. She tilted her head. Why not? Despite the situation, Naruto chuckled. I don't know. It's just how I feel. With so much time, I might become lazy and put off the things I want to do simply because I have the time to do it. Well, I'm pretty lazy myself, so maybe that's why. You don't seem lazy to me, Mukago said gently. He was a doctor, after all. My student would say otherwise, he supplied, eyes narrowing. If he were here, that is. The demon did not falter, but she did glance away. He'll be safe. I promise that we will release him in time. As long as you continue to comply. Of course, of course. He nodded slowly. It's just that I don't trust these two. Especially the one I beat into submission. Kaminu stiffened, a growl escaping his lips. You better shut up if you know what's good for you. Ignore him, Kaminu, Rokuro spoke for the first time. Every human has their way of coping before death. He is no exception. These are just the last ramblings of someone about to die. Naruto smirked in return, but said nothing. He noticed the forest becoming thicker and the clouds above them darkening. A rumble of thunder crackled across the sky, reaching his ears just after a flash of brilliant lightning. By now, they were outside of the city, far away from any more civilians or potential causalities. For a moment, he considered what Susumaru, Ozaki, and Murata were up to. Knowing them, they were likely worried, pacing about with trepidation at the situation that had just unfolded. Naruto frowned. He'd have to apologize for worrying them later. After all, he had left in a haste, without uttering a single word of comfort. The most important thing was that they were safe, and the two injured demon slayers would be protected by Susumaru while he was gone. Yet, in that instant, a spark of doubt crossed his mind. With him gone, would Susumaru revert back to her old ways and attack those two? No. He shook those thoughts from his mind. Susumaru was a changed person, and he had great trust in her, no matter how far apart they were. Naruto brought his attention back to Mukago. There's one more reason I wouldn't prefer to live forever, he continued. She faced him once again, horns sparking. The ones I care for. Eventually, they would all die, leaving me behind. And even if I come to care for new people, the same would repeat, over and over and over again. Interestingly, she seemed to mull over his words. But what if you came to care for others like you, others that were also immortal? Wouldn't that be enough? Maybe, he said, looking around. Is that the case for you, though? There was silence, and the tension between all three demons returned. Because his question had been aimed at the trio. Despite being immortal, despite being so similar, they did not seem to care for one another very much. In fact, this seemed to be the case for most demons he'd encountering, barring Tamayo and Yuichiro. Mukago did not answer the question. Instead, she changed the subject. As they moved through the forest, she talked to him about many more things. Her eyes were wide and curious, her words hesitant, yet insightful. She asked him about Tokyo, about his thoughts on demons, and about his work as a doctor. After all the words they'd exchanged, Mukago smiled to herself, an accomplished look on her features. "You really are an interesting human," she confessed, enthralled by their conversation. "I'm sure all the people you take care of will miss you when you're gone." Naruto was not surprised. While she had willingly engaged him in a lengthy discussion, her intentions to eat him were still plain as day. "Now that I've talked to you," Mukago continued, tears in her eyes, "I feel a certain connection between us. And when I finally take your life, you will become part of me, existing within my being forever, just as all the others I have devoured do." It was a strange, twisted philosophy. To her, she wasn't taking his life, but assimilating him into herself, where part of him would live on for many years after death. Ahead, Rokuro let loose a bellow of laughter. He'd been listening to them, it seemed. "And concerning that demon we saw with you," Rokuro jeered between laughs. "She hasn't truly changed, you foolish boy. She's only being patient, waiting for right moment to strike." Naruto ignored his poor attempt at aggravating him. His mind was on something else. Just in front of them, the forest began to thin out, and less than 100 meters away was the opening of cave. The cave was deep, much deeper than he thought, extending into the earth. Above, glittering stalactites hung from the ceiling, like the massive teeth of a monster's gaping maw. Likewise, a number of stalagmites also protruded from the ground, as sharp as they were large. Even though they were below ground, strange crystals emitted a light bright enough for him to see most details of this cave. It must have been Kaminu's ability that was responsible. They only moved a bit further until Naruto saw them. At least 15 people. Men, women, children. All eyes moved in their direction, a wave of fear flowing from those that had been captured. Just like him, they were wrapped in Rokuro's writhing shadows, strapped to a wall of the cave. Children cried, wailing as their parents tried to comfort them, which proved difficult when they were all immobilized and lacked control of their arms. Naruto gazed at them, sharp eyes roaming each feature. He soon found him, Yuichiro, at the far left of the captured people, his entire torso bound by black shadows. A burst of relief flooded his veins, and Naruto relaxed, but only momentarily, because his temper quickly rose when he considered the fact that these 3 demons had actually threatened to kill someone he thought of as a younger brother. He quickly calmed himself, locking eyes with Yuichiro. The younger teen met his gaze, and his features brightened at the sight of Naruto arriving with the demons. Yuichiro then noticed the compromised state he was in and seemed to become worried, but Naruto sent a smile and reassuring wink. No words needed to be said, because Yuichiro knew that with Naruto here, he had nothing to fear. "This is a tricky situation," Naruto agreed. Rokuro moved closer into the cave, the other 2 following behind him. "Okay, I came here willingly," Naruto implored. "I kept my end of the deal. Now you keep yours." A moment of silence passed, before both Rokuro and Kaminu erupted into fits of hysterical laughter. "Of course," Naruto thought, hardly surprised. "You're even more foolish than I thought," lower rank 2 intoned. "You think I'd ever make a deal with humans? Nonsense. You and the rest of these people will die here tonight." What?" Mukago's eyes widened. "That wasn't part of the plan, Rokuro." "Oh, Mukago." Rokuro smirked condescendingly. "You're always so sentimental when it comes to your food." "But—" "No," Kaminu interjected. "Both Rokuro and I agree with this. We're in a partnership right now, so majority rule. We're not letting a single one of them go." For the first time, Naruto could see anger bubbling in Mukago. Her horns sparked dangerously. Despite her willingness to murder scores of innocent people, at least she still had some principles. Naruto would give her that. Rokuro raised his hand, lifting Naruto up with his shadows. Then he made a pushing motion, which sent Naruto flying into the wall where the other hostages were, attaching him to the same place as the rest of the people. The heated discussion between demons continued, while Naruto quickly got to work on what he was about to do. He glanced at the people around him. They were held as though in cocoons, with only their heads exposed, and some of them were bruised and bleeding. Above him was Yuichiro, his shorter hair slicked with sweat. "How's it going?" Naruto asked the younger teen. In the face of this tense situation, Yuichiro could still smile. "You know, just hanging around." Naruto chuckled. "Nice one." A moment of silence slipped by, before he sighed. "I'm really sorry about all of this, Yui." "Don't apologize," the teen quickly said. "I knew the risks. I knew that demons attacked you more often than other people, but I came to work for you anyway." He craned his neck to look down at Naruto. "And as you know, this isn't the first time I've been attacked by demons. Really, I should be dead. Yet you saved me that day, and I have no reason to complain, even in this situation." "Wow." Naruto sniffled playfully. "You're going to make me shed a tear." Yuichiro shook his head, embarrassed. "Stop, please." But a tiny smile was still on his face. Then he looked around, mind returning to the issue at hand. "So, do you have a plan to get us out?" "Yeah, but it's a gamble." Yuichiro closed his eyes and relaxed. "I don't even want to hear about it." His smile was still present. "I trust you. Go ahead. Do what you have to do." Naruto nodded firmly, just as a cocoon child began to cry, her mother doing everything she could to calm her down. They were next to him, not quite within his reach. So Naruto focused chakra in his lungs, blowing a controlled, yet powerful gust of air in their direction. The girl's hair was ruffled by the sudden breeze, the surprise of the action calming her down. She turned to him with wide, curious eyes. "Don't worry," he soothed, whispering. "I'll get you out of here." Naruto had planned, but it was a bit risky, and he would need incredible control over his and Kurama's chakra to accomplish. On his own, he could easily break out of these shadows. But with the hostages being used as a threat, he was slightly limited in his options. All things considered, his best course of action would be to destroy all of Rokuro's shadows simultaneously, before the demon, or his shadows, could react. Naruto was confident he could do it. However, the question remained, was he fast enough? If Rokuro noticed his intentions, he could easily crush the people he held hostage with a thought. These shadows seemed to be an extension of himself, able to function even outside of his will. He wasn't bluffing, Kurama confirmed. Then if I make any sudden moves, he really will kill them. Indeed. The fox thought for a moment. So the key is to free all the humans at once. Yeah. I can't be too slow about it either. A normal human's reaction time was 0.2 seconds. A demon's, however, must have been even faster. In other words, he had less than a fraction of a second to free Yuichiro and the others before the shadows could kill them. Naruto counted all the hostages, sharp eyes roaming over those near him, as well as those furthest away. 15 in total, held in groups of 3. So 5 cocoons. But also, above, Yuichiro was held in his own individual prison of shadows. Then, it was 16. The blonde shinobi cracked his neck, gearing himself for the next few moments. I'm gonna need some of your chakra for this, Kurama. How much? Only enough to make 6 tails. Fine. But remember the portal, Naruto. It's already difficult enough to sustain. Diverting my chakra will have consequences. I know. We'll deal with it later. A pause. Very well. And then Naruto began to glow. Are we actually going to release them? Kaminu all but yelled. Rokuro sat on a rock, eyes shifting between the 2 demons before him. He also glanced behind. A short distance away, all his prisoners were bound by his ability, unable to escape. It would only take one thought to kill all the humans behind him, only one thought to crush them into dust, but he refrained from doing so. Demons like their prey alive, at least, as alive as possible. Most never went for dead bodies, preferring the freshness and warmth of a living human to that of cold, lifeless corpse. In his experience, devouring someone alive was more beneficial than any other alternative. He also wanted to leave these few behind for Mukago and Kaminu, as a sort of parting gift for their trouble. Because he would be taking the real prize for himself in a few moments. All he had to do was find a means to slip away with that blonde human in tow. "No, we won't be releasing them," declared Rokuro. "We won't?" Mukago echoed, continuing their argument. "That was part of the deal. We promised him." "You can't be serious," Kaminu huffed. I am." Her horns sparked. Rokuro frowned. "You've always had this strange propensity to become attached to your food. Always crying when you finally kill them." Mukago's brows furrowed. "Because it's much better when you know them, when you form some sort of connection. Then, you not only devour their body, but also their mind and soul, granting you more strength." "That's absolute nonsense," Rokuro replied. "Is it?" she said sharply. "No wonder you've been rank 2 for so long while I've managed to climb the ranks in only 1 decade. "What did you say?" Rokuro growled, temper flaring. Things were not going as planned, but he couldn't help the anger that burned within him. Mukago did not waver. "You heard me." Bolts of black lightning shot from her horns, striking the ground. And where each bolt struck, a new animal materialized from the ground. In total, 4 massive bears appeared before her. "You utter coward!" Rokuro roared, losing his calm, controlled demeanor. "Always hiding behind these stupid animals, always letting them do your bidding. You don't have the spine or the strength to fight without these disgusting creatures." Anger. For the first time, fury erupted from within Mukago. "You will not insult my animals!" Shadows whipped around Rokuro, swirling high above him. Forget the plan, he thought. Forget trying to slip away stealthily. He was going to take that human whether she liked it or not. Kaminu gritted his teeth. "Fuck this. I'm just going to start eating th." He was suddenly silenced by something startling. A golden flash of light had erupted behind them, near the hostages. It lasted only a second, but by the time the radiant glow faded, all of Rokuro's shadows were destroyed, and all the hostages were free. From the last vestiges of lingering light, Naruto emerged, ready to battle them one last time. "Now, Kurama." In that moment, he felt it. A surge of power he hadn't used for a long time. It was warm, comforting, enveloping him a golden glow. He was like a flame of fire, clothes burning, hair flickering with embers of ancient, boundless energy. Time seemed to slow down, his perception shifting. He conjured 6 tails before the demons could react, stretching them out to those held by Rokuro's shadows. Only after his tails had wrapped around each cocoon did the black masses begin to react, intent on squeezing its victims to death. But it was too late. Naruto's ethereal tails were much, much faster. Enveloped by golden limbs, the shadows began to burn away, vaporized by a pinpointed focus of Biju chakra. The energy was immense, but only for an instant, long enough for each shadow to be disintegrated. At last, everyone was free. Still wrapped safely in his tails, Naruto lowered all 15 hostages, including Yuichiro, to the ground. They all stared, enraptured by the sight of being that shined as brightly as the sun itself. Even Yuichiro was surprised, for he had never seen such a form, despite knowing Naruto for so long. "That's all needed, Kurama?" "Thanks." Now, no holding back, brat. You're outside the city. Give 'em hell." "Roger that." The glinting cloak of chakra dissipated, and Naruto brought his hands up to form his signature technique. 3 clones popped into existence, all with arms crossed. The first clone went to stand in front of the hostages, intent on protecting them from what was about to occur. His other 2 clones flanked him. Then, in unison, they lifted a palm, and 3 Raisengans began to form, one meant for each of the lower moons. 50 meters away, they all tensed, displaying a mixture of emotions. Anger from Rokuro, surprise from Mukago, and fear from Kaminu. Because he knew this technique all too well, a shiver of trepidation shaking his entire body. In spite of the conflict that had risen between them, they could swiftly put their differences aside for the time being, eyes focused on the human about to attack them. They felt a spike of energy from the 3 copies. It wasn't the same as the one they'd felt earlier, but it was still alarming enough for them to take on a defensive stance. Rokuro wrapped himself in layers and layers of shadows, forming a spherical mass of darkness that served to protect his body. Mukago ordered her bears to stand in front of her, 3 of them, using their massive, bulging bodies as a shield. And Kaminu erupted a massive crystal wall around himself, as thick and hard as he could make it. The crack of a sonic boom filled the cave, Naruto and his clones shooting forward in an explosion of speed. They cleared the distance between them in a blink, simultaneous thrusting 3 Raisengans into their hastily improvised defenses. 10 kilometers away. It was raining. The downpour began suddenly and without warning, soaking them to the bone. Still, the trio did not stop. They raced through the forest, running after Susumaru. She led the way, following a trail invisible to normal people. The icy wind and rain against Murata's face caused him to shiver. The pain in his sides slowly grew worse, sparks of agony cascading through his body. But he did not succumb, either did he waver as they moved through the dark forest. Ozaki was by his side. Her face was scrunched in pain, but she too pushed on. However, it was clear that they were slowing the pace. Susumaru was getting further and further away. She turned back, concerned yet irritated. "Go on ahead," Murata called. "We'll be right behind you." Susumaru nodded once, speeding forward. Every time she passed by a tree, she would rake a lengthy claw along its trunk, marking the way for them to follow. Even as she disappeared deeper into the forest, they knew exactly where to go. They did the same as well, using their swords to cut shallow, yet noticeable marks on any trees or boulders they encountered. That way, their backup, if anyone was even coming, would know where to go as well. Murata pushed forward, panting and heaving. In that moment, he lost his footing against the root of a tree, falling upon the forest floor, skidding to a halt as Ozaki turned back with concern. He wanted to tell her to keep going, but she was already beside him, wrapping an arm around his chest and lifting him up. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. He gave a little smile. "No. Not at all." "Then you need to stop. Your injuries are worse than mine," she asserted. "It's okay. I'll be fine." "You won't, though," Murata reasoned. "I need to be there with you." He struggled to his feet, pausing as he looked into those hazel-brown eyes. Rain trailed down her delicate features, illuminated by flashes of lightning. Despite the situation, he could not look away. Had she always been this beautiful? Murata wondered. Even with cuts and bruises, her face was as radiant as could be. She too didn't look away, or couldn't, transfixed by his lingering gaze. It was as though time had frozen. They probably wouldn't survive to see tomorrow, anyway. So why not? Why not? Ozaki inched closer, so close that their noses were almost touching. "Yoo-hoo!" A sound cut through the pounding rain, causing both of them to jolt away, scrambling to find the source of that sing-song voice. Another bolt of lightning rippled through the sky. And once the flash ended, someone was suddenly standing before them. Both demon slayers stiffened, surprised by the appearance of someone they immediately recognized. Murata's eyes widened, relief coursed through his veins. Lady Kocho. Ozaki was also in a state of shock, bowing her head in respect. "Lady Kocho, why you're here?" "Actually here." She almost felt like crying. A hashira had arrived, just when they needed one the most. "Yes, I am." Shinobu's voice was soft, calming, soothing all the worry that had built up inside of them for the past 2 days. "I heard your crow, and I rushed after you as soon as I could. So lift your heads. I'm here to help." Her words alone were like rushing water, and all their tension began to flow away. Seconds later, someone else arrived. Another demon slayer. Dressed in a skirt and white cloak, she descended from a tree, landing next to the insect hashira. "Thank you," Murata said. "Really, thank you so much for coming after us. I can't begin to express how." Shinobu raised a single palm, a warm smile on her face. "Say no more. There's no reason to thank me, nor is there a reason to let your guards down, either. She moved closer, undisturbed by the pouring rain. She was small, but still so intimidating. Once this mission is over, there will be time to relax. And time to continue where you left off. Both Ozaki and Murata glanced at each other, cheeks reddening with intense blushes. Shinobu only continued to smile. Now, explain the situation to me, she implored, her Tsuguko listening as well. The Rasengan was different from the Chidori in many ways. For one, it did not need a nature transformation to achieve, but it was still just as difficult to master. It also took less chakra to create than its counterpart. And lastly, it was not a piercing technique. The Rasengan was akin to a powerful punch that damaged you both externally and internally. So, while his attack didn't cut through the demon's defenses, it still managed to send them flying through the cave. Mukago watched with horrified fascination as her bears were torn asunder, ground into flesh by this swirling, glowing orb. Her animals held fast for a time, absorbing most of the initial energy. But the second impact blasted her back with so much force that blood fountained up her chest, filling her mouth with that familiar metallic taste. It hadn't been a direct hit, but the blast still managed to reach her, bypassing her bears in the process. She skidded across the cave's jagged floor, crashing through sharp, painful stalagmites. Reacting quickly, Mukago dug her clawed hands into the ground, slowing her momentum as her fingers left deep indentations in the earth. Dust had risen around her, obscuring many things from view. Still, she could see that Rokuro and Kaminu had shared the same fate, skidding to a halt next to her. Rokuro's shadows had been partially destroyed, and he held onto his chest, teeth gritted. Kaminu, the weakest of them, fared worse, his face scrunched up in pain. Naruto had broken his crystal wall as though it were made of paper, and shards of glinting gems littered the cave's floor. However, the clones that stuck them were now gone, skewered by crystal spears and piercing shadows that protruded the moment of impact. "Is he even human?" she heard Rokuro mutter. "How could he break out of my shadows?" She wanted to say something, wanted to reach out to them and suggest they work together. But she couldn't. Even before the dust had settled, a hail of projectiles were flying toward them. Dozens of kunai burst through the smog, glinting in the dim cave. She summoned 2 more bears to take on a defensive stance. Even then, the projectiles tore through her animals. Mukago dodged as best as she could, but 2 kunai pierced her stomach, causing a burning sensation as they shredded her insides. More blood bubbled up her throat. And though she instantly began to heal, another kunai punctured her body, coated in a strange, powerful energy. After the barrage of kunai, Kaminu quickly reciprocated, sending a hail of his own. This time, however, toward the direction of the hostages. Like earlier, Naruto breathed out a gust of air that threw each crystal spear off its trajectory. Slowly but surely, the trio inched closer until they found themselves side by side. More dust was starting to clear, and even without words, they knew that they had to work together. A blur registered in her line of sight. Above, Naruto was descending, eyes narrowed as he shifted through hand signs. Rokuro roared and sent his shadows to intercept the blonde above. Black tendrils shot upward, tearing through the air, intent on skewering him. Yet Naruto did not falter. He exhaled once more, breathing out a compressed ball of wind that knocked the shadows away and came crashing down on the demons. It was like being crushed. Mukago grunted, the force of the air pressure like an angry giant's fist. She could not stand, pushed face first into the ground, cracking the earth beneath. Before she could even recover, he was upon them, choosing to engage in close combat. She felt a blow to the face, a kick that bruised her ribs and her rolling across the ground. Even then, she summoned her animals, wolves, dogs, bears, and birds. All of them. Everything she could muster. By the time she was finished, over 30 creatures had appeared, snarling and growling as they rushed to engage the blonde. She'd been wrong. Terribly wrong. Naruto wasn't as strong as a hashira. No. He was beyond the hashira. Knowing this, she would not leave anything back. She'd never called forth this many animals, and she could feel her body trembling and her head throbbing painfully. But she didn't care. She'd put it all on the line. for the sake of survival. No matter how strong he was, he had a limit. Naruto was still human. He would eventually tire, especially as he fought both Rokuro and Kaminu and tried to keep the civilians safe. In time, she would have him. The animals descended like a wave as they raced toward him. Mukago, Naruto thought. Beside him, Rokuro and Kaminu stood, powers on full display. Tendrils of shadows came careening toward him, intent on dealing a lethal blow. Naruto pulled out 2 kunai, channeling wind chakra down both blades. He sliced each undulating tendril as though they were made of paper. Then, stretching out a palm, he sent a blast of compressed air toward Kaminu. The demon grunted, thrown back like he weighed nothing, crashing through giant stalagmites. Naruto quickly turned his attention to Rokuro, blurring forward just as he put up his shadows, another attempt at defending himself. But Naruto didn't falter. Chakra flooded his arms, and he punched right through the writhing black mass in front of him. It squirmed as though alive, reacting violently to the presence of his inner energy. Naruto's fist made contact with Rokuro's throat, and a choke sound escaped his lips. That wasn't all, though. Naruto continued, punching past the shadows he tried to use to protect himself. Blow after blow after blow came the demon's way. He did not stop. His fists crashed into his trachea once more, into his stomach, into his chest, into his face, giving him little time to regenerate. Next, Naruto pulled out a military knife, something slightly different from his kunai. Channeling a heavy amount of wind chakra through the blade, he severed all of Rokuro's limbs in a series of fluid motions. Then, he drew back a palm. And again, a Rasengan began to form. Rokuro's eyes were wide, fear chilling him to the bone. Even then, he willed his shadows to come forth, forming one last shield. But nothing could stop the human in front of him. Nothing, he realized. Not even Musen Kibutsuji could hope to stand against this monster in human flesh. The Rasengan tore through his shadows, banishing it from sight. And the orb of energy continued, careening into Rokuro's stomach. A howl of agony escaped the demon's lips. Then, he was launched away, a boom of sound following his departure. He smashed through brutal stalagmites, racing to where Kaminu was. Rokuro screamed, his body impacting against Lower Moon 6, sending both of them into the side of the cave. A cloud of dust rose high above, the walls cracking as both demons were buried under massive, falling rocks. All this had occurred in moments, and finally, he turned to face the horde of animals racing toward him. Brandishing 2 kunai, he flew through the stampede, a blur in the dimly lit cave. He cut down everything that came his way, his blades stabbing and skewering these creatures as they moved. However, shit! Naruto turned back. A dozen or so creatures had made it past him, now engaging with his clone. A spark of panic filled his mind when he saw one lunge at Yuichiro. But then, a familiar Temari slammed into the creature, punching a hole through its side. His eyes went wide. At the entrance of the cave, Susumaru stood, soaked to the bone, a small smile on her lips. They made eye contact for a second before she leapt over Naruto and his growling foes, intent on protecting the humans behind him. Good. Now, he could focus. He formed the necessary hand signs. Vacuum sphere. Naruto breathed out dozens of beam-like blasts of air, each one racing to skewer the remaining animals in front of him. His attack struck home, puncturing the eyes, throats, and limbs of all the creatures. Most of them collapsed, unable to stand, for he had deliberately targeted their weak points. Based on his earlier observations, it seemed Mukago's animals took far longer to regenerate than normal demons, which would give him enough time. Behind the wall of injured animals, he raced toward her, unhindered. She caught his gaze, a flash of terror coloring her features. Mukago did not try to move, nor did she turn away. She couldn't. Her legs buckled, body suddenly drenched in sweat. This was it. She was going to die today. She just knew it. A Rasengan was forming in Naruto's palm as he raced toward her. There was no hesitation. No mercy when he finally arrived. Mukago put up her hands in a futile attempt at protecting herself, to no avail. Then she felt it. one of the most indescribable sensations of pain she had ever experienced. The Rasengan impacted her face, shredding her features into nothing. A moment later, she was flying through the air, slamming into the merciless wall behind her. The pain was immense. Mukago felt as though she had shattered every bone in her body. And for the first time since becoming a demon, her vision blurred as a wave of blackness pulled her under. The dust was still clearing when Naruto pulled Rokuro from the rubble. Taking him by the collar, he tossed the demon onto an open area in the cave. Rokuro looked broken, utterly defeated. His arms were regenerating, but he didn't dare make a move against Naruto, because he knew the truth. He was no match for this human. Naruto loomed over him. There was no pity, nor was there hatred, in his sea blue orbs. He was different from demon slayers in that regard. He held no innate malice against them, but if pushed, he would stop at nothing to end their lives. Too injured to move, Rokuro closed his eyes and accepted his fate. Naruto pulled out something from his holster. A slip of paper. Written upon it was a language that few recognized and even fewer could utilize. Fuinjutsu had many disciplines, just as ninjutsu, taijutsu, or genjutsu did. And of these many disciplines, creating seals that could immobilize enemies was not his greatest strength. That title would go to Jiraiya, in the same way space-time techniques were a specialty of his father. But Naruto could still manage. While he wasn't the best at immobilization, he had enough knowledge to pull it off. He put the slip of paper on Rokuro's chest, then placed his palm over it. He focused for a moment, and sent a specific ratio of chakra through the slip, activating it. The seals glowed, and then, the ancient runes seemed to spill out from the paper. Black letters exploded outward like ropes, before wrapping themselves around the fallen demon, a hold even greater than that of his shadows. Rokuro tried to move, but he couldn't. What did you do to me? Since I can't kill you with normal means, Naruto explained, I've restrained you. You won't be able to move for a few hours. By then, the sun should have already risen. I see, whispered the demon, gazing upward. Well done, boy. You bested us. Naruto rubbed his spiky mane. A part of me actually wanted to give you a chance, but, after all you did today, you sealed your fate. A humorless chuckle escaped his lips. Give us a chance? No normal person would ever consider such a thing. Are you even human, boy? Naruto shrugged. I'm human. But by this world's definition, who knows? Rokuro rose a brow, but said no more. He let out a sigh and closed his eyes once again, resigned to his fiery fate in the morning sun. A distance away, Susumaru and his clone finished off the last remaining demon animals. She paused, her temari disappearing. Then she looked at him, then at his clone, head tilted in utter confusion. He'd mentioned shadow clones to her before, but this was her first time actually seeing them. He only waved in return, smiling. Wasn't she supposed to be watching Ozaki and Murata? He shrugged, figuring his clone would talk to her about it. Naruto pulled out another slip of paper from his holster, intent on digging out Kaminu and sealing him as well. Crack! Naruto leapt back just in time. A wave of piercing crystal spikes erupted from the ground, forcing him to put some distance between him and the rubble. An instant later, Kaminu burst from the rocks that had held him under. However, instead of attacking, the demon turned tail and ran, fear in his eyes as he sped away. He summoned more crystal spikes in an attempt to slow Naruto down, to no avail. Naruto avoided them all, then tensed, ready to spring forward, a kunai in hand. But before he moved to intercept the fleeing demon, a purple blur filled his vision. Glinting steel. Multiple thrusts of a blade. And Kaminu was halted mid-escape. Someone had arrived, seemingly from nowhere. Her katana, thin as a rapier, was plunged into the demon's skull. A rush of air followed her arrival, a testament to her impressive speed. Huh! Naruto abandoned the chase, observing the new arrival from afar. Simply put, she was beautiful. Her skin was pale and unblemished, reflecting the dim light of the cave. Delicate features, pink lips, and a slender nose defined her striking visage. Then there were her eyes, a set of violet orbs that held no emotion. Likewise, her hair was black, the ends of her bangs tinted a vibrant purple hue. She was also small, tiny, barely tall enough to reach his chest. Yet she did not falter as she faced the demon desperately trying to escape. Kaminu's face twisted with rage. He lifted his hands, forming two crystal swords. You bick! He stiffened, stumbling back as the woman swiftly retracted her sword from his skull. Then she stabbed him again and again, multiple thrusts puncturing his chest. A moment later, Kaminu was on the floor, sputtering incoherently as dark, grotesque veins bulged along his body. His face and limbs swelled to twice their normal size, his eyes popping from their sockets. He screamed, horrified and afraid, writhing in pain. After a few seconds, his twitching came to an end, and he grew quiet and still, tears streaming down his face. Well, that was no fun, said the woman, an odd cheerfulness in her tone. She did not sheath her blade. Instead, she moved forward, stepping over the dying demon at her feet. She met Naruto's gaze, head tilted as she caught sight of the restrained Rokuro just behind him. HM? What's this? Still on the defense, she stopped just short of him. Like he thought she was small. The woman gazed upward, features devoid of genuine emotion. Are you Naruto Uzumaki? Yes? He replied, curious. She was a demon slayer, judging by her attire. And you are? Oh. Pardon me, the pretty woman chirped with a bright fake smile. I'm Shinobu Kocho, insect hashira of the Demon Slayer Corps. I received an urgent message from 2 other members concerning an attack on Tokyo. Ozaki and Murata sent for you, Naruto realized. He was saddened, yet somewhat touched that they had cared enough about him to call for help. He really needed to apologize. Yes, they did, and they're on their way here as we speak. I'm just much quicker, Shinobu said with a wink. Sword still drawn, she gazed upon the immobilized Rokuro. I was under the impression that you needed to be saved, that you were being held captive. Naruto rubbed his hair sheepishly. Well, that was the case a few minutes ago. Shinobu nodded slowly, enchantingly. She inched closer, so close that he could almost feel her against him. She gazed upward, past her drenched bangs, beautiful eyes locking with his own. And might I ask why there is an injured demon behind you? He met her gaze calmly, even as she stood on the tips of her toes. Despite the proximity, he did not back away, nor was he intimidated by her presence. Him? I beat him into a bloody pulp, obviously. Especially after he threatened all those innocent people. She glanced at the other hostages, who seemed to be in the care of someone that looked strangely similar to the blonde in front of her. And for the first time, Shinobu's eyes widened a fraction. Then she backed down, stepping away. You beat a member of the 12 Kizuki? Shinobu inquired. She glanced from the fallen demon back to him. Then she took another look at the injured, twitching animals around the cave. But you're not a demon slayer? Nope. Naruto grinned. Not just one of them, though. He pointed a thumb to the other side of the cave, where Mukago was. She was out cold. Behind her were cracks in the wall so large that it was difficult to believe a normal, untrained human was capable of such a feat. Now this is unexpected, Shinobu murmured. Her momentary shock was quickly pushed aside, replaced by that oddly calm demeanor and blank, emotionless eyes. Did you kill him? Naruto gazed at Kaminu's unmoving form. Yes, she said cheerfully. I made sure to use one of my stronger, quicker poisons. Of course, he also suffered in the process. But unfortunately, there was nothing I could do about that. Right. Naruto did not believe her for a second. Regardless, he couldn't blame her either. After all, he'd done the same to them just moments ago, utilizing techniques that were quite painful. So I don't have to wait for the sun to rise then? Shinobu nodded. What a relief. In that case, I'm sure you can handle the rest. Naruto stepped aside, and Rokuro began to tremble. He'd listened to their entire conversation. And even though he felt his death was inevitable, the fact that it was about to happen so soon still terrified him. Be careful, Naruto warned. He uses shadows to attack. They're really annoying. Thank you for the information, Shinobu said warmly, sword in hand. Just then, a black shadow shot forward, aimed at the female demon's slayer. She didn't flinch, gracefully dodging the desperate attack, moving through the air like a butterfly. Even without the use of his hands, Rokuro could still make somewhat complex structures, though his control was severely lacking. The shadows grew in size, taking on a protective shape around the fallen demon. Even then, Shinobu did not relent. She immediately took notice of the fact that he still wasn't moving. "What happened?" she asked. "Why is he just lying there?" Naruto gripped his kunai, ready to assist at a moment's notice. "I used a technique to immobilize him." Shinobu paused. She glanced back at him, perplexed. Her eyes narrowed, features still strangely calm. "What sort of technique?" "It's a family secret, passed down by my parents." It wasn't a complete lie. "Oh? A family secret," she echoed. "Yeah," Naruto affirmed, her eyes narrowing some more. Before she uttered another word, 3 figures came rushing into the cave. It was Ozaki and Murata, as well as a young girl he didn't recognize. They'd finally arrived, soaked to the bone. Swords already drawn, they stopped just behind them, alarmed by the destruction that defined the cave. Naruto turned, giving them a huge grin. "Yo! Naruto!" yelled Murata. "You're okay!" Ozaki exclaimed, relief in her voice. "Come on!" "Of course I am," he shot back. "What, were you guys worried about me?" "Yes," they said simultaneously. Naruto chuckled in return, looking upon them with a warm gaze. "Then I'm sorry for making you worry," he added gently. And I'm glad that you came to help, even when you didn't need to." "Thank you?" His sincerity froze them in place, and both demon slayers could only nod in reply. They'd barely known him for a day, but even then, they were still so happy he was safe. It really tugged at his heart. "Susamara's over there." Naruto pointed. "You can help get the injured out of here." They heeded his words and went ahead, avoiding the dismembered animals around them. Kaneo did not follow, however. Instead, the girl had her blade drawn, her eyes vigilant, scanning for any signs of danger in the cave. Naruto's attention returned to Shinobu. Rokuro was still on the floor, shadows whipping about in one last desperate act of survival. Shinobu had entered a peculiar stance, sword held tightly in her hand. She took a breath, readying herself for another attack, an attack that was sure to hit home. Naruto watched her closely, crossing his arms. Something was different about her, he realized. The way she held herself. The confidence in her stance. And the calmness of her breaths. By this alone, he could tell she was leagues above Ozaki and Murata. He trusted she could handle this final act, so he set his sights on the unconscious Mukago. The pain was the first thing she felt when she awoke. Unrelenting and merciless, it radiated through every fiber of her being, pulling her from the darkness that held her close. Her face hurt the most, even as she felt the healing process mending her wounds by the second. Instead of moving, she remained still for a time, just waiting, and waiting, until the pain settled into a dull, aching throb. Finally, she opened her eyes, and fear immediately gripped her heart. The cave was damaged, littered with debris. Kaminu's lifeless body was a distance away, and Rokuro was on the ground, surrounded by shadows as someone with a sword moved to finish him off. Surely, she was next. Naruto, her prize, her one chance at growing stronger, was also near. He turned to her, kunai in hand. His clothes were coated in blood, the blood of her animals. Even now, they struggled to stand, slowly healing from the damage dealt by the blonde before her. As he turned toward her, flashes of light filled her mind. A vision suddenly befell her, one from a time she no longer remembered. There was fire, heat, smoke, all of it choking her. But someone else was there, holding her, carrying her through the flames. She couldn't see his face, but his eyes were as blue as the sea, his arms strong and sturdy. The world was turning black, the memory fading, but she could still see him smiling, whispering to her. "Survive, Mukago." Mukago opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She tilted her head and screamed to the heavens, her voice reverberating through the hollow cave. Suddenly, she could see nothing. She could hear nothing. But she could feel everything. Everything that her animals felt. Then the injured creatures around her began to move, drawn into the screaming demon. She was almost like a magnet, pulling every one of them into herself. Mukago couldn't predict what would happen to her body after doing this, but she knew the consequences would be grave. Yet she didn't care. She had to survive. That's all that mattered. Naruto paused at the sight, brows rising. It occurred nearly instantly. One moment, these creatures were on the floor. Then the next, they were all sucked into the female demon, somehow merging with her body. Her features became disfigured, misshapen, and she began to increase in size, taking on the form of multiple animals. She grew and grew until her back touched the ceiling above, sending a shower of massive rocks upon all those that inhabited the cave. After several seconds, she had the appearance of giant, silver wolf, with multiple heads and multiple arms. Mukago's eyes were blank, devoid of reason. She reared her head and roared. It was a horrible sound. A sound that shook the very cave around them. The creature raised a massive paw, bringing it down upon the first person she could find. In carrying arms. Dust covered the cave like a veil, kicking up rocks in the process. Visibility was reduced to nearly zero, and Naruto could hear coughing in the distance, could hear the frightened screams of those still attempting to escape this situation, turned nightmare. Mukago had become a monster, transforming into something that surprised even him. He could see her silhouette within the smog. She thrashed about, slamming into the walls of the cave. With each erratic motion, the underground cavern shuddered, and massive stalactites would fall from the ceiling. Naruto dodged each falling projectile, leaping back to where Shinobu was. "What happened?" she inquired. "I'm not sure," he supplied. "I think she merged with all the animals she normally controls. But this seems different, like a desperate act, a last resort." "I see." Shinobu sheathed her blade, a tint of frustration coloring her gaze. She hadn't gotten a chance to finish Rokuro off, and now, with the added dust and debris, the demon was nowhere to be found. "Are things getting fun now?" he asked, referring to her earlier statement. Unbidden, Shinobu actually laughed, a soft, genuine sound. Then she turned to the giant creature preparing to bring the whole cave down on their heads. "Maybe a bit too fun." She unsheathed her blade once more, having added more poison. "I can't behead that thing. But maybe with poison, I can kill it, or at least slow it down. There's no guarantee, though." "It's worth a try," he agreed. "Still, for now, our number one priority is getting everyone out of here unharmed." The creature continued to thrash about erratically, moving dangerously close to the hostages, which Susumaru, Ozaki, Murata, and his clone were protecting from falling rocks. Looking at things now, it seemed that many of them were injured and would need to be carried out of the cave. "And how do you suppose we do that?" Shinobu questioned. Naruto said nothing, forming his signature hand sign. Inwardly, he grimaced. He'd already used far more chakra than he wanted to today, and he could feel the strain on his body. But he shoved that concern aside, drawing upon his internal energy for another offensive. 6 shadow clones popped into existence beside him, shocking Shinobu. Her normally calm demeanor was shaken as she looked on with a mixture of alarm and suspicion. By now, the cave was beginning to tremble, and giant cracks formed along the walls, sending another shower of rocks tumbling from above. Naruto and Shinobu dodged the hail of stone, deftly ducking and weaving between each obstacle. Without a word, his clones moved forward, rushing past the unstable, senseless Mukago. Each clone grabbed 2 hostages, and everyone began to run, just as a large section of the cave collapsed, sending another cloud of dust their way. Mukago turned in the direction of the fleeing people, senseless rage in her slitted eyes. Even though she was large, she moved quite quickly, clearing the distance between them in one bound. Shinobu turned to her student, pinning her with a hard stare. "Get away from here, Kaneo!" She raised her voice for the first time. And though her student hesitated for an instant, she quickly turned and fled, following after Naruto's clones as they carried the people to safety. Susumaru, Ozaki, and Murata also rushed past them, each of them carrying someone as well. They did not stop to look back, because they understood the situation, and they trusted that Naruto and Shinobu could handle this final foe. With Mukago bearing down on them, Naruto molded the chakra in his stomach, pouring it into his arms. Shinobu watched as he held up both hands. Gale palm. A titanic burst of air obeyed his command, erupting outward, striking the massive creature barreling toward them. It slowed her down, but only for a moment, giving everyone time to escape. This left Naruto and Shinobu alone. Recovering from the concussive blast of air, Mukago brought down two massive paws, cratering the ground where both of them stood. With superior speed, they avoided the blow, blurring away. Insect breathing. Shinobu leapt forward, shattering the ground beneath her feet. Haori fluttering in the wind, she extended her sword for her most powerful attack. Dance of the Bee Sting, True Flutter. A single thrust. She impacted with Mukago's giant eye, pumping heavy amounts of poison into the demon's iris. The effects were almost instant, dark veins bulging along her crimson sclera. But it wasn't nearly enough to kill a demon this large. Mukago only howled in pain, and three smaller dog-like creatures erupted from her body as though molded from clay, swiping at Shinobu midair. Sensing danger, she kicked off Mukago's eye, retrieving her sword and flipping away before the smaller creatures could shred her to pieces. And like earlier, the animals returned, fusing back into Mukago's giant body. Shinobu grimaced as she fell, wary of the stalagmites protruding below her. It was sure to be a painful landing. However, before she could hit the ground, Shinobu saw Naruto rush toward her position in the air. He leapt forward, grabbed her hand, and pulled her away from the spikes beneath. Then he landed on a wall, literally sticking to the vertical surface. Shinobu looked up. Once more, she was alarmed by the strange abilities this human, was he even human, possessed. Still, she gripped his hand tightly as both of them gazed at the creature that seemed to be losing its mind by the second, roaring and trashing about. I don't think it can control itself, Shinobu speculated. Yeah, seems that way. Naruto lowered his gaze. What about your poison, is it working? Dangling by his hand, she shook her head. I'm not sure. Normally it would, but I think its body's so large that I need gallons and gallons to actually kill it. Is this really a lower moon? Shinobu thought, having seen the number present on her eye. Then we'll use a different strategy, Naruto said. Another one of your techniques? Pried Shinobu. Naruto nodded once. He prepared his mind and body for his next move. But then, his eyes widened, sharp gaze snapping to an area Mukago had already destroyed. Did you hear that? He asked. She arched a slender brow. HM? What? Just then, Mukago's paw came careening into the wall. Naruto quickly pulled Shinobu up, wrapping an arm around her waist. He tensed, shooting forward as a massive, clawed hand crashed into another section of the cave, destroying more and more of the ceiling. Still soaring through the air, Naruto had aimed his jump toward the area the hostages had been held. Now I see, said Shinobu, realizing what he had been trying to tell her. Finally, they landed, and Naruto released his hold around her. In front of them was a crying child, his foot buried under rocks. He looked at them fearfully, glancing at the giant monster that was growling and ramming its head into the surrounding walls. Naruto frowned. The kid must have been left behind, hidden by the thick dust around them while everyone else managed to escape. It's okay, sweetie, Shinobu cooed, getting on one knee. She smiled brightly, and this one actually seemed genuine. You're safe now. We won't let anything happen to you. That's right, kid. Naruto tousled his dark hair, then stooped down and lifted the massive rock pinning him under. The boy immediately latched on to Shinobu, burying his head in her shoulder. She held him tight, glancing at Naruto. The blonde looked forward, chakra already spiking. Go on ahead. Get him to safety. I'll be right behind you. Despite her growing suspicion of him and his strange, demon-like abilities, Shinobu still shook her head. Her features were calm, but the tiniest hint of a frown marred her pristine visage. You know I can't just leave you. Let's both get out of here first, then I'll figure something out. Why, you worried about me? He teased, smiling as her slight frown deepened. I'll be fine, Miss Kocho. You have to take care of him. You've seen what I can do. If anyone can survive this, it's me. More rocks began to fall from above. Shinobu felt the child in her arms shaking with terror. Naruto was right. The boy's safety was paramount. So she conceded. Fine. Muscles strengthened by the air around her, Shinobu readied herself to sprint away before the cave came crashing down. She turned to him once more, smirking. You better be right behind me. He only nodded, that same grin finding its way back to his handsome features. Shinobu's legs tensed. She held the child closer. Close your eyes, little one. The boy complied, shutting his eyes as she finally sped off, becoming a blur in the darkened cave. She escaped Mukago's hulking body before the demon could even react, crossing the 100 meters between them in a blink. Shinobu could only hear the sound of wind as she ran, the world narrowing into a dark tunnel. Behind her, Naruto stretched out his hand one more time. He diverted some chakra from the clone still at the clinic, just for a few seconds. The Rasengan swelled to life above his palm, growing, and growing, and growing until it was large enough to illuminate a darkened portion of the cave. The portal, Naruto, Kurama warned. I know. Mukago turned to him, transfixed on the giant orb he held. Naruto leapt forward. He tore through the air, Otama Rasengan in hand. Time seemed to slow down. And just before he made contact with her, something emerged from Mukago's body, bursting forward like a rocket. Another animal, a smaller wolf. It soared toward him, jaws open. Already in the air, he could do little to change his trajectory, and the creature sailed just below him, sharp teeth sinking into Naruto's leg before letting go and falling downward, obscured by dust and falling rocks. Naruto hissed, but ignored the creature. Instead, he focused on driving the Rasengan into Mukago, with the intent of burying her in this collapsing cave. A massive explosion signaled Naruto's technique. Shinobu resisted the urge to glance back, to see if he truly was behind her, even as the interior cave began to collapse, a shockwave of air shaking the structure to its core. She held the boy, gently stroking his hair as she moved, feet pounding into the ground as the tunnel ahead began to widen, confirming the exit was near. One final push, and she was out, greeted by falling rain and flashing lightning. Shinobu slowed to a halt, skidding across the grassy field. In seconds, she was soaked, water dripping down her onyx hair, seeping past her haori and into her uniform. Still holding the child, she looked around. Naruto's copies were still around, and the people taken captive were safe. They watched with bated breath, feeling tremors as the cave collapsed in on itself, a putrid cloud of dark dust rising from the entrance. Silence reigned. Someone moved forward. A woman with orange-tinted black hair. Ozaki and Murata moved as well, following after her. They lingered near the cave, waiting and waiting. The woman had fangs and claws. There was also a deep wound on her forehead, Shinobu noticed. And it was already healing, hissing with steam. Unconsciously, her hand found the hilt of her sword. When Ozaki and Murata had told her that they were working with a demon, of all things, Shinobu did not know what to think. In fact, she had brushed it aside, opting to first find the 3 lower moons before even considering that bizarre detail. And yet, that bizarre detail was standing right in front of her. Here, now, as Demon Slayer, Shinobu had an obligation to end this thing's life. And afterward, she would give Ozaki and Murata a stern talk, one that detailed just how dangerous what they were doing, standing near a demon, was. I have to go find him, Susamaru decided. Wait, Murata advised. It looks like more of the cave could still collapse. Susamaru shrugged. I'm a demon. I won't die even if I'm hurt, so don't worry. As she took a step, a sudden blast of wind shot from the entrance of the cave, banishing the dust, and even the rain, around them. Shinobu watched with calm, controlled fascination as the blond man finally emerged. His clothes were torn, ripped in certain areas. A trail of blood dripped down his leg, a bite mark near his calf muscle. Other than that, he was unharmed, if a bit tired. He still smiled though, tugging the demon, Rokuro, by the collar. Naruto unceremoniously dumped Lower Moon 2 onto the grass, then turned to face Shinobu. "Looks like you get another chance, Miss Kocho," Naruto said, grinning. "He's all yours." Chapter 7. Will you hold my hand? "I have only one request of you, boy." Naruto arched a single brow. The rain continued to fall, soaking him in seconds. He didn't mind though, as he looked on with a curious gaze. Before him, Rokuro was on his knees, arms severed once again, the seals around his body restraining the demon completely. "And what would that be?" Naruto asked. Shinobu had since relinquished the child they saved, placing him in Kaneo's arms, and now, she entered a solid stance, drawing her thin blade from its sheath, ready to put Lower Moon 2 down for good. "My request," Rokuro said, "is that you remember me, even after my death." The blonde doctor shrugged. "They won't be fond memories, you know." "That's perfectly fine," Rokuro continued, death looming over his head. At this point, it was impossible to escape. Not only was he surrounded by demon slayers, but he was also within the range of Naruto, the one who had utterly defeated him and his comrades. "I only wish for someone to know that I lived, that I existed. No one else will. Not my fellow demons, and certainly not him. So please, I beg of you, acknowledge my time spent here on Earth, if only for 1 second after my death." Shinobu shot forward, her blade plunging into his chest. Rokuro did not attempt to use his shadows, nor did he flinch as that thin sword punctured his heart. He accepted his fate as her most potent poison flooded his body, destroying him from the inside out. Seconds later he was on the floor, twitching and spasming as life slowly, but surely, left his body. He stared upward for a time, the rain trailing down his face, until the light of existence left his gaze, and all was silent and still. Until a crack of thunder shattered the sudden quiet. Susumaru leapt at Naruto, a spontaneous act, and wrapped her arms around him. His eyes widened momentarily, before he relaxed into her touch. Like him, she was soaked, drops of water trailing down her orange-tinted hair. She stayed this way for a time, just holding him, before reality seemed to snap Susumaru from her trance-like state. A blush colored her pale cheeks. She quickly pulled away, rubbing her neck in embarrassment. "What was that for?" Naruto asked, smiling. Susumaru looked away, clearing her throat. "And nothing. Just glad that you're okay." "I see. In that case, I'm sorry for scaring you," Naruto replied. He turned to Yuichiro, who had also moved to stand by his side. The teen shivered in the rain, but he seemed rather happy, considering all that had recently transpired. Naruto tousled his turquoise locks, smile widening. "And again, I'm sorry that you went through this mess. I should have done more to keep you safe." Yuichiro brushed his apology off, gazing up at the person he considered an older brother. "I already told you that it's okay." A rare grin etched across his gentle features. "But yeah, you should have done more to keep me safe. If I'd died, the whole clinic would be out of business within a week." Naruto laughed. "You're right. I can't risk losing you if I want the place to stay functional for more than a day." Despite the rain, he pulled both Yuichiro and Susumaru into a hug, an arm around either of their shoulders. They did nothing to resist his hold, both of them looking up at him with bright, happy eyes. It was a peaceful moment, all things considered, interrupted only by one person. Shinobu watched with her head tilted. She retracted her sword from Rokuro's corpse, flicking the blade and sending a splatter of blood onto the grass, where it was soon washed away by the rain. She turned to the trio, eyes calm, and a beautiful smile on her lips. "Dr. Uzumaki," Shinobu called in a soothing tone. Naruto looked up, letting his two companions go. He took a protective step forward and stood in front of Susumaru. "Yes, Miss Kocho?" Shinobu lifted a hand, pointing a single finger in their direction. Towards Susumaru. "Are you aware that there's a demon standing right behind you?" His eyes narrowed, and he took another step, putting himself between the hashira and his friends. "I'm well aware," he replied. I assumed Ozaki and Murata informed you of this fact. She nodded with smile. Yes, yes. They did. But I was too occupied with the situation at hand to pay much attention to this little detail. Ozaki and Murata shared a nervous glance, looking between Naruto and the insect hashira. A tension had arisen between them, one that was almost palpable, one that they didn't dare infringe upon, not even with their words. Shinobu looked Naruto in the eyes. He did not flinch, even as she masterfully twirled her sword and pointed it in his direction. You must know this by now, Dr. Uzumaki, the woman continued. I am a demon slayer. So are these three. As such, we have dedicated our lives, our very bodies, to the cause of eradicating every demon from the face of this country. We train endlessly, take on dangerous missions, and sacrifice everything in order to achieve this goal. Shinobu's eyes flickered towards Susumaru, an imperceptible anger burning in those purple orbs. Thus, as a member of the Demon Slayer Corps, it is my sworn duty to execute creatures just like her. Shinobu blurred forward without warning, thundering toward them. Not again, Naruto internally groaned. They clashed, sparks flying despite the water falling from the sky. Oh my, said Shinobu. Naruto had instantly pulled out a kunai, parrying her thrust as it came careening his way. A moment passed. She pulled back, then began anew. Her thrust came quicker than ever, piercing through the air. She was fast, he'd admit. Faster than anyone he'd encountered in this world. But to him, that simply did not matter. Time slowed to a crawl. And he could see it. Her blade moved forward, parting the rain as it came dangerously close to his face. The glint of steel filled his vision, and he dodged, weaving past a flurry of well-aimed blows. She stabbed upward, downward, then toward the left, then the right. But the results were the same. Naruto avoided every thrust with ease, kunai rising to deflect her final attack. A clang of steel against steel echoed around them. All this while, he had not moved from the place he stood. Shinobu noticed this, her eyes sparking with a hint of awe. Finally, he moved forward, planting a kick to her chest. Her face scrunched up momentarily, before she was sent flying, skidding to a halt as she plunged her sword into the earth, slowing her momentum. Kaneo quickly leapt to her mentor's side, only after placing the child she held somewhere safe. The teen drew her sword, blank gaze landing on Naruto. Having the wind knocked out of you was no fun. Shinobu grimaced as she stood, sucking a sharp breath in an attempt to dull the pain that now burned at her chest. Kaneo took a step forward, prepared to do battle, but Shinobu stopped her, grabbing the teen by the wrist. Then the hashira stood up. She glanced toward the blonde that had kicked her 20 meters away, a small frown marring his handsome features. It's all right, Kaneo, Shinobu said, loud enough for all to hear. Put your blade away. We can't beat him. Kaneo seemed conflicted, her resolve wavering, until she complied and removed her sword from view. The hashira also sheathed her blade, that same smile returning to her face. She held up both hands and chuckled. Seems like I can't win this one, huh? She confessed, walking toward them once again. Naruto still stood protectively in front of Susumaru, kunai in hand. I concede, okay? I won't try to attack again. Naruto didn't let his guard down, but the tension in the air began to lighten. Just when I thought we started to see eye to eye, you attacked me. That's unfortunate, Miss Kocho. He rubbed his wet blonde hair. But honestly, I can't say I'm surprised. These two over here, he inclined his head toward Ozaki and Murata, tried exactly what you just did yesterday. Must be a demon slayer thing. Hit first, ask questions later? Ozaki and Murata both looked away, shuffling with embarrassment. Oh, did they? Shinobu inquired. I would hope they did, since not killing a demon on sight is against core rules. She crossed her arms. But even worse than that is the fact that they were willing to vouch for a demon. She looked over to Ozaki and Murata, pinning them with those calm purple orbs. This act stands against everything we do as demon slayers. You two understand just how serious this is, correct? Murata dipped his head, and Ozaki said, Yes, Lady Kocho. We're aware. Shinobu nodded slowly. And you're also aware that you can be relieved of duty for this, in which your uniforms will be taken, and your swords confiscated? Murata swallowed, slowly lowered his head. Why yes, ma'am. The hashira continued. She moved to stand in front of the two younger slayers. Are you ready to stake all that training, all those years spent becoming a demon slayer on what you told me earlier? She questioned. Are you willing to throw it all away to protect that demon? Both of them nodded, despite the potential consequences their actions would bring. Ozaki glanced at Susumaru, then returned her gaze to Shinobu. I'm not totally convinced myself, but the fact still remains, Lady Kocho. She has done nothing to indicate she behaves like typical demons. Ozaki took a shuddering breath, as though fearful to let go of all the hatred that had built up within her for so many years. When we arrived in Tokyo, she was the first demon we found. So, naturally, we went after her. She hadn't done anything to us, but we attacked without warning or mercy. Still, she did not lift a finger against us. She never fought back. She even protected us when the lower moons attacked, despite the fact that we had hurt her the day before. Ozaki turned to Susumaru. And even though we were injured and bleeding, she made no attempts to attack us. Naruto looked at Susumaru fondly. She was somewhat surprised the Demon Slayer duo were actually standing up for her. Shinobu nodded slowly, still not convinced, but she left Ozaki and Murata alone. She turned to Naruto once more. What about you? She asked. Are you some kind of demon as well? Naruto almost rolled his eyes, recalling when the pair of demon slayers thought the same thing a night ago. He's not, Murata blurted, then winced, holding onto his bandaged side. We thought the same when we first met him, but he proved to us that he isn't a demon, that he's human, by standing in the sun. Is that so? Shinobu inquired. She smiled sweetly. If you are in fact human, then how can you do the things that I witnessed in the cave? Making copies of yourself. Standing on vertical surfaces. Restraining high-level demons with a slip of paper. Could you explain? She was wary, but also curious. Genuinely interested in him and his unnatural abilities. My anatomy deviates from yours in subtle, yet impactful ways, he explained, referring to his chakra circulatory system, something almost indistinguishable from the cardiovascular system. I'm a bit different from normal humans, but I'm not a demon. Different, you say, Shinobu repeated. She stroked her chin, considering his words. Unfortunately, I'm still not sure I believe you. Why not? Naruto asked. He wasn't angry. Just curiously. After all, Ozaki and Murata had affirmed his statements. That wound on your leg. She pointed downward. It looked far worse a minute ago. That's also another one of my abilities. Shinobu moved closer, eyeing him. His face. His body. Her sharp gaze trailed along his physique, intrigued by the human standing before her. In that case, are you willing to prove that you aren't a demon? She asked. Not to be outplayed, he too moved closer, until he loomed over her tiny form. Sure. What do you want me to do, stand out in the sun? The hashira shook her head. No. That won't be necessary. She gripped the hilt of her katana. Allow me to inject you with my poison. That's the only way I'll be convinced. And no worries. Even high doses are harmless to humans. She demonstrated this fact by slicing her forearm with the weapon, the subtle tint of purple poison painting her wound. Yuichiro began to protest, but Naruto waved him off. Fine, Miss Kocho. But only on one condition. She fluttered her lengthy eyelashes, looking up at him with that ever-present smile. What sort of condition? You have to ensure that Ozaki and Murata won't be punished. Naruto crossed his arms. They acted bravely today, put themselves in harm's way to protect civilians. It would be unfair for their reputation to be tarnished, simply because they broke one silly rule. Dr. Uzumaki, cried Shinobu, feigning alarm. I do believe you've garnered some misconceptions about me. Dishonesty is not a part of who I am. I will look at the facts objectively and deliver an honesty report when I return to headquarters. Naruto's shoulders eased of their tension. All right then. Go ahead. Your hand, please, she implored. Everyone watched closely as he stretched out his hand. Shinobu took it and was surprised by how warm he felt, despite the pouring rain. "I'll be gentle." Shinobu unsheathed her sword and lowered his arm. She carefully stabbed the center of his palm, puncturing his skin, letting not only the poison in, but his crimson blood out, where it flowed and fell to the ground. Several seconds passed. Naruto didn't start convulsing on the ground, nor did he show any signs of discomfort. Shinobu's smile widened. She retracted her blade and placed it into her white scabbard. "Well, I was totally wrong," Shinobu exclaimed, closing her eyes as she smiled. "Looks like you really aren't a demon, after all." She glanced at Ozaki and Murata. "And if these two are also convinced about this demon, I'm sure there's some truth concerning their claims about her." "So you believe what we told you?" asked Murata. She smiled softly. No. I never said I believe it. I still need some evidence, especially when I report back to headquarters. Unfortunately, I can't tell a lie, or alter details, so I'll have to include everything that occurred, as well as your involvement with her. And your involvement with Dr. Uzumaki, as well. Which meant they could still be severely punished. Ozaki tremored at the thought, and not just because of the rain. She glanced at Murata, who seemed firm in his conviction concerning Naruto and Susumaru. She found her strength renewed by his strong gaze, so she nodded in response to the hashira's words. "We understand, Lady Kocho." Ozaki dipped her head in respect. "Good," Shinobu said cheerfully. She let go of Naruto's hand before proceeding to tear off a piece of her insect-patterned haori. Naruto arched a brow as she grasped his hand once more, wrapping the white fabric tightly around his injured palm. "You don't have to do that," he said. "The bleeding would have stopped in a few minutes." Shinobu shrugged. She finished tying her improvised bandage, gently squeezing his hand as she finally let go. "As a healer, letting injuries go untreated, especially one that I inflicted, doesn't sit right with me. I'm sure you feel the same way as well." In a way, he did, recalling when he had treated Ozaki and Murata after their initial skirmish. Shinobu looked around. The rain wasn't as harsh as before, but it still persisted, tiny drops of water pelting her skin. The hostages were huddled under a tree, overseen by Naruto's ever-present copies. Shinobu almost laughed. Truly, she stood no chance against him in a real battle. And neither did the lower moons, it seemed. "May I speak with you privately?" the hashira implored. Naruto thought for a moment, then nodded. He left with her, assuring Yuichiro and Susumaru that he would be fine. At the moment, they did not seem particularly fond of Shinobu. Kaneo also tried to follow, but Shinobu waved her away. "Don't worry. We're just going to talk." A flicker of emotion bloomed in the teen's blank gaze, but she only nodded and remained where she was. Shinobu didn't take him far, only to the entrance of the collapsed cave, still smoldering as dust continued to flow from the inside. "Firstly, allow me to apologize for attacking you," the hashira said genuinely. "If I'm to be completely honest, part of my reason for such actions was to appraise your combat ability." "You demon slayers are all strange," Naruto remarked, then tilted his head. "How do you rate me, then?" She smirked playfully. "Not very high." And Naruto chuckled, shaking his head. Shinobu moved closer. She peered into the collapsed cave. "What happened to that demon?" she inquired. "I attacked her with a technique that brought the entire cave crashing on her head," he explained. "I also sealed the entrance. There were no other exits in the cave, so she's trapped in there." The hashira inspected the entrance of the cave, sharp eyes roaming over the massive rocks that had been purposefully collapsed, effectively covering both entry and exit. After several minutes of observation, she finally nodded, convinced by his explanation. Naruto eyed her closely. "What will you do now?" "I'm returning to the city," Shinobu revealed. "In case there's another demon attack, I need to be there to help." Both of them left the entrance of the cave. They then paused when they saw the people that had been put through this frightening ordeal. Some of them were injured, and his clones were tending to their wounds, inspecting those who were worse off. Naruto frowned. He'd rather them get medical attention in a cleaner setting. So you're a doctor? Shinobu glanced his way. A great one at that, I hear. He looked rather sheepish. Murata said that, didn't he? Yes. She nodded with a smile. He didn't go into much detail, though, since I was in a rush to find the lower moons at the time. Technically, his path to becoming a doctor was a strange one. He didn't attend school here in this world. But his skills in medicine had been so impressive that Tamayo, a doctor with some influence, had recommended him to be approved by the Japanese Medical Association in Tokyo. After a week of study, thanks to numerous shadow clones, he aced all the exams and proved his competency in all forms of medical practice, even ones unheard of in this world. With that settled, he'd have something productive to do while trying to find a way back home. You also mentioned that you were a healer, Naruto remarked. The hashira nodded. Again, that smile did not match the look in her emotionless eyes. I'm not officially a doctor, but I do know much about the human body. She stroked her chin in thought. Actually, I'm more of a pharmacist, if I were to describe myself. Considering her usage of poison, it made a lot of sense. As they continued to walk, Shinobu considered many things. Most notably, the blonde beside her. Of all the things she had witnessed in her life, this was one of the most unexpected. A man, untrained by the Demon Slayer Corps, had actually been able to hold his own against not only her, but 3 members of the 12 Kazuki. She found it both disconcerting and exciting. Perhaps she should try bringing him into their organization, where he could become even more powerful by learning a breathing style. He would be a force to be reckoned with, and maybe the key to finally eradicating all demons from the face of the planet. However, the fact that he was sympathetic to even one demon was problematic. With this little feature of his beliefs, those in the Corps, especially her fellow hashira, would never accept him. Hell, she wasn't sure of what she was feeling at moment. Her anger and hatred for demons still burned like a roaring fire. But maybe, just maybe, that could start to change. If this demon named Susumaru proved herself, Shinobu would be willing to see things from a different perspective. For her older sister's sake. Finally nearing the group of people, Shinobu asked, "What will you do about them?" Naruto crossed his arms. It's counterintuitive to treat them here in this harsh weather. Many of them were shivering, huddled closely under a tree. I'll take them to my clinic, have them thoroughly checked out, he continued. You're welcome to join me if you want. I have plenty of rooms to spare. Shinobu nodded slowly, convinced that he just wanted to keep an eye on her. At least for a little while. Until he could trust her. That sounds like a wonderful idea, she said happily. But what about that demon, the one you buried? What do you plan to do about that one? I'll leave a clone here overnight, he assured. If something were to happen, or if she were to try to escape, one of me should be enough to hold her down. The insect hashira considered his words. The weather was bad, and she wanted to get back to the city, where she would be ready if another large-scale demon attack took place. So, perhaps, this was for the best. I suppose I have no other choice but to trust you on this, she finally said. That's interesting, considering the fact that I don't trust you yet, he replied. Shinobu tilted her head innocently, smiling as he spoke. But if Ozaki and Murata can see the good in Susumaru, I think you and your student will come around as well. That's awfully optimistic of you, Dr. Uzumaki. Shinobu inched closer, eyes glinting as lightning flashed above. I might just pull something when you aren't watching. Naruto grinned, gaze meeting her own. You're not stupid, Miss Kocho. I know you won't try anything while I'm around. And while Ozaki and Murata were around, as well. Despite her higher rank, she still seemed to care about her subordinates. That's true, she admitted, clasping both hands behind her back. Finally, they arrived at where the former hostages were staying. Naruto proceeded to explain that he would take care of all of them, free of charge, and he would make sure that all their injuries would be further examined at his clinic. Those were demons, weren't they? Someone asked. He seemed to be a father, holding his wife and child closely as it rained, the same child he and the hashira had protected. Naruto glanced at Shinobu. She stepped forward, expression warm and kind. Yes, she explained. Those were, in fact, demons. However, you're safe now. We've made sure to eliminate them. I've always been suspicious of their existence, the man continued. When you hear all those stories of people going missing, especially outside of the city, you have to wonder if those tales are actually true. They're true, all of it, Shinobu admitted. But the government suppresses the truth, choosing to ignore the problem, even as it festers and continues to worsen. Hearing her words, the crowd seemed to cower fearfully. So she continued. But do not be afraid. As members of the Demon Slayer Corps, my fellow swordsmen and I fight to protect those who can't protect themselves. Even if those in authority continue to ignore this issue, we won't. We'll continue to fight, for your sake, and for the sake of your loved ones. Her voice was soft yet powerful, banishing the trepidation that had begun to grow in these people. Naruto watched her closely, crossing his arms. Shinobu was fascinating. She was a woman that hid her emotions yet strived to comfort those in need. You saved my son's life, the same man said. Thank you. Both of you. He paused. I'm curious, though. Why were you two just fighting? Both of them glanced at each other, the blonde doctor chuckling sheepishly. Later, Naruto used his clones to transport the people back to the city. Each of his copies carried the severely injured to his home. But one of them stayed behind, with the intention of making sure that Mukago did not escape from her prison. Shinobu also followed, officially accepting the offer to stay at his clinic. Now that he thought about it, carrying so many people was odd, and it would serve to draw unwanted attention. As a result, once in the city, they stuck to the rooftops, staying out of sight as they made their way to his home. Those who weren't injured were dropped off at shelters, along with those who had lost their homes during the Lower Moon's attack. So, left with about 10 people, Naruto did his best to help those who truly needed it. And for the first time in a long time, the clinic bustled with activity. Susumaru had retired to her room, not willing to intrude in an area she did not understand. Kaneo was outside, sitting near his front door, where she would not be soaked by the rain. He'd given her a towel to dry herself, even as she observed his garden, ever ready for any potential demon attacks. Fortunately, Yuichiro hadn't been too injured, so he decided to help those that needed aid more than him. Presently, he was upstairs tending to Ozaki and Murata, both of them seated on a hospital bed. Their wounds were bad, but not as bad as some of the people Naruto and Shinobu were attending to. Are you sure you don't want Naruto to see you right now? Yuichiro asked. He removed Ozaki's bloody bandage and inspected her arm, which had a deep bite mark in the muscles near the elbow. She winced as he cleaned the wound with antiseptic, before wrapping it in fresh bandages. Ozaki nodded, sweat falling down her brow. I can wait. The civilians come first. Okay, Yuichiro said softly. He admired their strength, because honestly, though these injuries weren't life-threatening, they were still serious enough to warrant attention. Yet they held strong, choosing to wait. The teen moved on to Murata, who was shirtless, bleeding through the bandage he had hastily wrapped around his side. Yuichiro inspected the injury, cleaned it, then frowned. I can't do much about your wound. Grabbing a fresh cloth, he handed it to Murata. Hold this. Put pressure there until the bleeding lessens. And take this. Yuichiro didn't like giving opiates for pain, due to their addictive nature, but Naruto had given him permission to use small doses if needed. Murata swallowed the tablet offered, downing it with a cup of water. His teeth were grit as he used his other arm to put pressure on the wound, the pain making him wince. He soon felt Ozaki take his hand in hers, giving a little squeeze. Murata relaxed at her touch, and Yuichiro draped them in a large towel, since both of them were soaked and had begun to shiver. Thank you, said Murata, smiling. No problem. Yuichiro began organizing his supplies. But you two deserve the real praise after what you did tonight. Ozaki shrugged. It's our job. No praise required. Her eyes lingered on his face, a perplexed look crossing her features. Then her gaze found his arm, or rather, his missing limb, displayed through his sleeveless shirt. Yuichiro followed her gaze. A demon did this, if that's what you're wondering. I figured, she said. After all, the wound seemed unnatural, different from a normal amputation. Murata frowned. I'm sorry. I wish a demon slayer had been there to help you when it happened. I've gotten over it, Yuichiro said softly. And I've also realized that it's impossible to save everyone. So don't feel sad about what happened to me. Just strive to help as many people as possible. I mean, look at what both of you did tonight. Even though some people died in the process, you still helped save so many. You should be proud of that. Even though he looked younger than them, he was so mature, so wise. And as Ozaki continued to observe this teen, that same nagging question returned to her mind. May I ask what your name is? She inquired. They hadn't really interacted with him yesterday. You know ours, but we don't know yours. He smiled. Yuichiro Takito. Both Murata and Ozaki shared a sharp glance, eyes widening in surprise. They remained silent for a while, letting that name sink in. Then they returned to the issue at hand, unsure of the right words to say next. Are you by any chance related to someone named Michiro? Murata finally asked. Now it was Yuichiro's turn to freeze, a chill of hope tingling down his spine. How do you know that name? He all but demanded, tremoring where he stood. Ozaki perked up. So you do know him? Why yes, that was the name of my younger brother, he quickly answered. Now please tell me. How do you know him? He's Demon Slayer, just like us, Murata revealed. In fact, he's a hashira, one of the most powerful members in the entire corps. He's similar to Lady Kocho in that regard. Yuichiro stumbled back, nearly dropping his medical supplies. Tears brimmed in his turquoise eyes. The normally calm, level-headed teen seemed to fall apart, unwilling to believe it until he got more evidence. He's alive? Yuichiro asked tentatively. He leaned against the table. Tell me you aren't lying to me, he begged. Is my younger brother really, truly alive? Ozaki didn't know why, but she felt a surge of emotion building within her. She was instantly reminded of her own brother, who she had lost when she was only a child. He is, she promised. He's alive, and he's fine. In fact, he's better than fine. Murata nodded, still holding on to his side. Master Takito is an amazing person. He's most likely out there saving countless people from demons as we speak. You've got to be kidding me. Yuichiro's voice shook. He couldn't take it anymore. The tears began to flow, more freely than it had since he first awoke in Naruto's care those years ago, when he had first realized the truth of his younger brother's death. But it seemed that was no truth. His brother was alive. And in that moment, he let hope bloom in his heart. Yuichiro couldn't help it, laughing and crying at the same time. Downstairs, Shinobu and Naruto moved through the clinic, inspecting and treating those in need. Despite just being at odds with each other, they worked together like a well-oiled machine. Even though she specialized in pharmaceuticals, Shinobu was still knowledgeable about practical treatments for patients with traumatic injuries. Her hands moved with the instincts of someone that witnessed a variety of wounds in their daily lives, most likely from treating hurt or dying demon slayers as they returned from the front lines. She sutured many lacerations, approximating semi-serious gashes with a calm gaze and a confident demeanor. She handled the less egregious wounds, while Naruto oversaw the more dreadful ones. It was busy for an hour or so before things began to die down. Most of the patients had already been tended to by Naruto's clones when they were still outside the city, and a lot of what she did involved inspecting said injuries and making adjustments to any wounds that might have reopened on the journey back to Nerima. She made sure to clean them thoroughly, as well as administer pain medication to those who desperately needed it. Even now, when less patients were being seen, things didn't stop there. While she and Naruto had been taking care of the injured hostages, other patients, those who had been hurt in the initial attack, were brought to his clinic from the general hospitals in Nerima. Shinobu had been shocked by this. Surely, a larger facility would have been more equipped for those that were in truly serious condition. But that wasn't the case, it seemed. Naruto had a reputation here. So much so that hospitals actually opted to bring their patients to him when there was nothing more they could do. And now, after finishing with the former hostages, Shinobu watched him work on another patient that had been transported from a general hospital. Despite the rain, just so Naruto could see them. It was a young woman. She was covered in blood, with horrible bite marks all over her body. "We're sorry for the inconvenience, Doctor," one medic said. "We've just been over capacity tonight. That wild animal attack has every hospital up to their necks in patients." Naruto waved them off with a soft smile. "Don't worry, you two. I understand. And I'll make sure she survives." The two medics dipped their heads, then left, presumably to return to the hospital they came from. "Animal attack?" he said. "That's what they're calling it, apparently," Shinobu replied. "How convenient." Naruto rolled up his sleeves. A sheen of sweat coated his brow. He seemed a bit more tired, eyes heavy with exhaustion. But he persisted, washing his hands as he prepared to take care of the woman bleeding out on the surgical table. Shinobu didn't think the woman could be saved, considering all the blood she was losing. Yet Naruto moved forward, and so did she, keen on observing his next actions up close. What she saw shocked her. Something that seemed a hopeless situation was turned around in a matter of minutes. He cleaned the woman's wounds, and with precise surgical tools, also removed fragments of teeth embedded by Mukago's demon animals. Then he did something she would have considered impossible were it not for the fact that she had already witnessed him performing other supernatural techniques. He healed her, quite literally. Naruto stretched out both palms and focused. A green glow, just subtle enough to be seen, extended forward, targeting the vicious bites along the woman's body. In time, her injuries began to close, mended by an energy exclusive to him. His act seemed simple, yet Shinobu could tell that this technique required incredible precision and focus. He maintained a steady stream, adjusting it accordingly as the patient's wounds were healed, her cells responding to his chakra, regrowing tissue, bone, and skin. The rest was handled by sutures, in which he approximated the corners of larger lacerations. This must have been what his clones did to the hostages, even back in the forest. No wonder the other patient's wounds weren't as serious as she'd anticipated. He had already started healing them before they arrived at the clinic. By the time he was finished, the woman's features were calm, peaceful, and she was fast asleep. Naruto picked her up and carried her to an empty bed, where she could rest. My. You become more interesting by the second," Shinobu remarked, hiding her shock behind a false smile. "No wonder Ozaki and Murata praised your skills as a physician." "It's not my best work, but she'll live. I only made sure to heal the worst of her injuries," Naruto said, shrugging. "And I'm not the best either. I can name 2 people whose skills in healing far exceed my own." "Oh?" Shinobu tilted her head. "There are others like you?" "Not here in Japan," he revealed. "In my home country. Far from here." "You're not from Japan?" asked the hashira, growing more interested by the second. Naruto managed a small smile. "Nope. Not at all." Shinobu wanted to ask more questions. However, he was already turning away, headed to the basement, where his demon friend was, and where the insect hashira was prohibited from entering. "Hopefully, the hospitals don't send any more patients," Naruto remarked. "You're a medical expert, so I know you can handle the people already here." He began walking downstairs. "Feel free to eat anything you want. There's plenty of food for everyone, and my student is a pretty great cook." With that, he descended to his mysterious basement. To do what? She had no idea. But things were becoming more and more fascinating. Of all the things that could have happened tonight, meeting someone like Naruto was the least expected. Once again, she considered his numerous, seemingly endless, abilities and wondered. Was it possible for Naruto to cure Master Ubuyashiki of his mysterious illness? The thought echoed in her mind, and a pulse of hope filled Shinobu's heart. The master, the sole leader of the Demon Slayer Corps, had suffered for so long, slowly succumbing to a disease even she couldn't understand, riddled with blindness, frailty, and horrible lavender-colored scars. So perhaps this was her chance to help him, to help the one that had held the organization together for many, many years, despite his condition. Shinobu lifted her arms in back-arching stretch. Her clothes were wet, and rain continued to fall. Kaneo was still outside, keeping watch with a towel wrapped around her body. Shinobu frowned slightly. She'd make sure to call her Tsuguko inside. What an interesting day, the hashira said to herself, thinking. I wonder if there's a place I can take a bath. Naruto unlocked the room with a pulse of chakra. The door opened up to him, revealing a place covered in the runes of complex Fuinjutsu. 6 of his clones were still seated in a circle, their arms outstretched. Their irises were yellow, the outside of their eyes tinted orange, a telltale sign of natural energy flowing through them. They were all shirtless as well, and upon their bodies were markings, seals meant to act as chakra receivers, somewhat similar to Nagato's black rods, by which he could transfer his chakra into them from vast distances. The only difference between this and what Nagato did with the paths of pain was the fact that Naruto could not manipulate the movement of his clones. He did not control their actions, but in return, he had greater range when it came to him and Kurama supplying them chakra. With these seals etched on their bodies, he could travel great distances without worry and still be able to provide energy to the portal. Finally, Naruto rubbed his rain-sodden hair, a yawn escaping his lips. Sorry for the wait, Kurama. You better be, brat. Naruto chuckled, walking in. He grabbed a pad of paper, a brush, and a vial of ink. How's it looking? Not terrible, but not good either. I've managed to stabilize the outer ring. However, it won't stop shrinking. The blonde frowned. Even a few moments of diverting Kurama's chakra had been enough to disrupt much of his progress. Naruto crossed his arms and hummed, considering what to do next. He certainly wasn't the greatest Fuinjutsu user to ever live, and to many, this would be a nigh insurmountable task, but he wouldn't give up. He couldn't give up. No matter the setbacks. No matter the failings that came with completing this project, he would find a way. As tired as he was, Naruto still got to work. He observed the portal, which to him looked like a pitch-black tear in the fabric of space. It tremored and shook, vibrating, slowly but surely closing, even as Kurama and his clones worked to feed it ample amounts of chakra in a controlled, meticulous stream. What he'd given to have a Rinne Sharingan. If he did, opening portals would have been much, much easier. Naruto stroked his chin in thought. He stretched out a hand and focused, and while he did, he felt a familiar pricking sensation in the air, flowing from the area his clones occupied. An idea suddenly popped into his head. What if I added a new pattern around my clones? What sort of pattern? One that stops residual chakra from escaping the room. Explain. I hadn't noticed it until now, but there's a level of chakra in the air, a lot of which isn't being fed into the portal. Interesting, rumbled Kurama. So, in essence, you wish to contain every bit of chakra that might be escaping without our knowledge. Exactly. Naruto moved closer, just outside the diameter of his clones. Doing that might provide just enough energy to stop the portal from closing. It might work, Kurama said. Do you have an array strong enough? I think so. Or at least, he had a combination of seals he could use. Naruto sat down and began to write on the pad of papers in his hand. Even as the portal shrank, he took his time, racking his brain for any notable information Jiraiya had taught him, any special patterns that would aid in a containment seal strong enough to prevent chakra leakage from his clones and into the atmosphere. It took some time, but he found something that would work. Inspired by the very one on his stomach, Naruto had crafted an array similar to the 8 trigram seal that contained Kurama's chakra within him. It would consist of a spherical base that circled around his clones, effectively containing them, as well as any chakra that might be escaping or seeping out. With that, nearly 100% of the energy he and Kurama funneled to his clones would be contained in this small area, preventing unnecessary expenditures of chakra. Naruto gave his design a look, before asking Kurama to scrutinize it for errors or inconsistencies. I approve. Good. Time to get started. Naruto pulled out a kunai. He looked at his palm, once again noticing the cloth Shinobu had tied around his hand. As unorthodox as she was, he could tell she at least strived to do the right thing, as seen during their time in the cave. Of course, he didn't fully trust Shinobu, but he was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. Naruto untied the piece of her haori, the cut she'd given him nearly healed. Then he gave himself a new injury, slicing his index and middle fingers. Blood flowed heavily, and he stooped down and began to draw his newest design. For something this important, he opted to use his blood, which, according to Fuinjutsu research, might have possessed stronger properties than simple ink. If memory served him well, Kakashi had explained that he also used his blood to contain Sasuke's curse mark, back during the Chunin exams. After a moment of deliberation, Naruto decided to use both. His blood would form the outer perimeter behind his clones, and ink would be used for the inner perimeter. Once done, he wiped off the blood dripping down his hand, before sitting down just outside the boundary of the circular pattern he had created. One more thing left. Don't overdo it, Naruto, Kurama warned. You've already used up large amounts of reserved chakra today. Yeah, got it, he thought back. Kurama was right though. Keeping Susumaru company during nighttime. The fight with the 3 lower moons. Constantly feeding chakra into his clones. Then healing all those people. As well as what he was about to do now. Naruto felt like doing nothing but taking a long nap after this. He stooped down one more time, pushing chakra from his body and into the ground. Which activated the seal. The intricate patterns glowed dimly, lighting up the room. Susumaru perked up. In her room, the lamp seemed to flicker. She glanced away from the book, The Tale of the Utterly Gutsy Shinobi, which she'd been reading. Almost halfway through the story, she found herself engrossed by the writing, filled with depictions of ninja villages and brutal wars. Placing the book down, she glanced at her lamp. A moment later, a familiar feeling washed over her. The same one she'd felt when Naruto confronted the lower moons in the city. It was warm, then cool, akin to a wave passing through her body. It was subtle, but just noticeable enough for her to sit up in bed. But as soon as it came, the feeling was gone. Curious, Susumaru rose from her bed and opened the door. A long hallway greeted her. Across from the lengthy corridor was another room, the one whose door was covered in those strange patterns Naruto usually crafted. Seals, she recalled. Not many areas in the clinic were off limits. In fact, none of them were. Not really. Except for this one room. Yuichiro wasn't allowed to enter it either. And Naruto had made it clear that they shouldn't even attempt to look inside, lest they expose themselves to unnecessary danger. Still, Susumaru doubted she could actually enter that room, judging by the seals that decorated the door. Yet her curiosity remained. Just as she left her room for a closer look, the pattern door opened, and Naruto stepped out. She almost jumped, because his eyes instantly met hers. Susumaru laughed awkwardly, but Naruto only smiled, beckoning to her. She moved forward as he shut the door behind him, a subtle glow enveloping the wooden frame. This was a strange night, huh? He asked tiredly. Susumaru leaned against the wall. Yeah. It felt like a blur, though. She crossed her arms, glancing his way. I still can't believe you were attacked by members of the 12 Kizuki. I can't say I'm surprised. Demons have always attacked me, even before I met you. Right. Susumaru shuffled uncomfortably. Hey, don't give me that look, Naruto said softly. What you did in the past is just that, in the past. I told you this already, didn't I? I know, she replied. It's just, I still feel. Guilty? He asked. She nodded, and he joined her against the wall, crossing his arms and resting his head upon its hard surface. Miss Tamayo told me that she still feels guilty about what she's done, even after so many years, Susumaru explained. And I don't know if it's alright for me to let go of the guilt, or keep it as a reminder of all the horrible things I've done, so I never fall back to my old ways. Naruto listened to her intently, and she was glad that he did. That alone was enough to ease her mind. The fact that someone actually cared enough to listen. Honestly, I'm not sure how to answer that, he said, then smiled. But I'm here for you if you ever need to talk, okay? Okay. Her smile mirrored his own. Thanks, Naruto. No problem. He stifled a yawn. Also, good job today. You protected a lot people. Even Ozaki and Murata noticed. They really stood up for you out there. Naruto scratched his whiskered cheek with a finger. I feel kind of proud of you, too. Susumaru's face warmed, and she looked away. Well, I didn't do much. At least, when compared to you. Hey now. Don't change the subject. I'm praising you, not me. Naruto chuckled, and Susumaru continued to flush under his praise. Still, they kept on talking, recounting the events of the night, even straying into light-hearted topics as well. After a while, Susumaru mustered the courage to ask him something that had been weighing on her mind for some time now. Hey, do you think, she began, shuffling nervously. Is it possible for me to come with you when you leave Japan? Silence. Susumaru glanced at him, then paused. Naruto? To her surprise, he'd actually fallen asleep, arms still crossed as the weariness finally caught up to him. She smiled warmly, observing his peaceful features. Tentatively, she reached out and gently stroked his cheek with her thumb, enthralled by the small indentations of his whisker-like birthmarks. Good night, Naruto. Outskirts of Tokyo. She could hardly move, could barely even blink. Her body felt heavy, numb. That last, desperate attack had taken everything she had. Everything she could muster. And yet, Naruto had defeated her, destroying her giant form with one powerful technique, bringing the entire cave crashing on her head. It was both frightening and incredible. But the battle was over. Kamino was dead. Rokuro, most likely dead. However, that didn't matter. Because she'd done it. As a smaller wolf, she managed to sink her teeth into his flesh, and she tasted the most incredible thing in the world. She'd never had such blood. Such enchanting, alluring, potent blood. Even as the cave collapsed around her, she could do nothing but succumb to bliss. A bliss so enrapturing that her eyes rolled into the back of her head and her body twitched and spasmed with waves upon waves of pleasure. Even now, she could taste it. Different from Yuzen's blood, but just as satisfying. Like it was on an opposite spectrum, yet incredible, nonetheless. Mukago panted as she crawled out of that cave. Her wolf, the only one not buried alive, led the way, digging through the rocks to block the exit. It seemed to take hours of crawling and digging. But finally, the outside world opened up, her animal pushing past a massive boulder, before a flash of lightning signified her escape. She continued to move, dragging her body against the ground. Her wolf paused to help, licking her cheek as it pulled her by the hem of her kimono. Mukago smiled softly. Few had ever cared about her like her animals did, and she was grateful to have them. Suddenly, Mukago's wolf stopped pulling her. It turned sharply, growling dangerously as someone stood at the entrance of the cave, kunai in hand. Oh. He was still here. What did she expect, though? That he'd leave without making sure she died? Of course he wouldn't. Her wolf lunged at the blonde, teeth glinting in the dark. But Naruto didn't flinch, cutting her creature down in seconds. He stabbed a kunai through its head, then moved to where she was, looming over her. Weakened by the fusion with her animals, Mukago could do nothing. She felt him pull her from the inside of the cave, stray rocks falling as he did. Outside, rain pelted her skin, soaking her thoroughly. Naruto stooped down and placed a slip of paper on her stomach, and suddenly, she could not move a muscle. He did the same for her wolf, which was now next to her, its warm fur against her body. Mukago was on her back, and all she could do was stare at the sky, the rain drenching her silver hair as flashes of lightning painted the sky. Naruto sat down beside her, arms crossed, leaning his head against the exterior of the cave. Waiting till sunrise, Mukago realized. The reality of her death slowly but surely crept to the surface, a shiver of fear running through her. He didn't say a word, just sat there, gazing forward, observing the forest in front of them. Hours seemed to go by, hours she spent reflecting on her life, her failures, and all the things she wished had never happened. I'm really going to die, aren't I? She whispered, a shudder on her lips. Finally, Naruto spoke. Yeah. I see, Mukago said. And strangely, she began to accept it. Even then, those words still echoed in her mind, Those words that told her to survive. Who were they from again? Her brother? Her father? Her friend? The memories were so distant, yet just within her reach. What happens to all those creatures when you die? He asked. They die with me, Mukago spoke honestly. At that, her wolf snuggled a bit closer, even as it slowly healed from the wounds Naruto had given it. He nodded. Okay. Another bout of silence slipped by, in which she continued to think, time moving slowly, yet so quickly at the same time. The rain had stopped falling, too. She hadn't even noticed. That woman, Mukago whispered. How can she stay by your side without trying to eat you? Naruto leaned back. I don't really know, he revealed. But the truth of the matter is that she decided to change. Change? She's still a demon, Naruto clarified. However, she's working so hard to tame her desires. Could I do the same? Mukago wanted to ask. But she knew the truth. A small taste of his blood had only made her desire to devour humans stronger. It simply wasn't possible for her to change. Or rather, she didn't want to change. The horrible reality was that she liked to kill, to eat people. People that had done nothing wrong. She liked to watch them squirm in pain. She enjoyed it to a startling degree. Her veil of shyness was nothing but a farce, a lie used to momentarily reassure her victims, only for her to snuff that hope out once and for all. Naruto might have realized this, because he made no attempts to reason with her. I told your fellow demon that I was willing to give you a chance, all three of you, he said. But even I have my limits. Kindness is a finite resource. Mukago craned neck to face him as he spoke. She could move no other part of her body. Still, she mustered the strength to do this last thing. Also, she could look into his eyes, those eyes that reminded her of the time before she became a demon. Someone once told me to survive, no matter what, she said quietly, reflecting on her life. But I don't think becoming a demon was the way. He wanted me to do it. Naruto listened, but said nothing. And that was enough for her. A listening ear. Just above the horizon, the sun was rising, coloring the sky red. Morning already? When was the last time she had seen the sun? 40 years ago, she remembered. I'm scared. Her voice was soft, barely audible. A shudder of terror tingled down her spine. Naruto regarded her with a tender gaze, the light of the sun growing. Will you hold my hand? Mukago whispered. There was a lingering pause. Then she felt it, gentle fingers intertwining with her own. So warm, so soft. So safe. Her eyes began to water. Naruto claimed his kindness was finite, yet here he was, holding her hand. And his sea blue eyes. They held no malice or anger. Only a warmth she could not describe. Thank you, she said for the last time, her vision filled with the brightness of that beautiful morning star.